Thanks very much for having us, and I'm really delighted to be joined by such esteemed panelists. As you'll hear, they really do represent the earliest innovators from within FinTech, and they've just had amazing successes over the last few years, and undoubtedly more to come. I'm not going to say very much more then, and I'm going to turn over to them. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, say a bit about their company, and perhaps set the context as to why they see today, or in general, the sector as one that's very important. And then we'll come around and I'll have an opportunity to ask each of them a question or two. So with that, can we start with you, Nick?
Sure. My name's Nick Hungerford. I'm a member of the team at Nutmeg. Nutmeg is an online saving and investment company that helps people of all levels of wealth have the best investment service. So we democratize what has traditionally been quite a stuffy industry of wealth management.
Thank you. And then Damien?
Hi, my name is Damien Kimmelman. I'm the co-founder of a company called DueDil. It's a company intelligence tool. We started off 5 years ago. We're now about 85 people. Back 5 years ago, there wasn't even a fintech, a tech scene, let alone a fintech scene. And it's pretty crazy to see how many people are so interested in fintech in London now.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And then Gonçalo?
Hello, my name is Gonçalo. I'm co-founder and CEO of SyndicateRoom, and we are one of the leading equity crowdfunding platforms in the UK. We are the only crowdfunding platform currently in the world that allows a company to do the entire equity journey from very early stage seed idea all the way up to IPO. So we've been authorized by the FCA and became a member of the London Stock Exchange, and now we allow companies to tap into the crowd for their IPOs and placings in the main market and AIM.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Jephson, co-founder and chief behavioral scientist, which means, yeah, I do know what you're thinking. It's a good title. But actually what we do is behavioral analytics, helping hedge funds, asset managers and banks improve performance and conduct management as well. So really where a lot of the disruptions happened in the 10% improving services, we're really at the operating level of the business to focus using data that they already have to collect to improve that decision making both in front office and middle office.
Great, thank you so much. So like I said, I'm just going to have time for one or two questions apiece. We could spend all day because I think the breadth of experience here is really unparalleled, but I just wanted to help set the stage for everything else that you might hear today. So actually, Nick, one of the, I think, themes, obviously, about Innovate Finance as an organization, but certainly today's event, is how the UK is such an obvious place for FinTech. Your sort of beginnings as a company actually started somewhere else. Do you mind sort of talking about how you've seen the landscape evolve here in the UK and contrast it potentially with other hubs?
Sure. So Nutmeg was conceived, if you like, in Silicon Valley. I was a student over in California studying for my master's degree, and that's where the idea came from. And we tried very hard to start the business there. Raised our first bit of money from a venture investor, Tim Draper over there. But it was really tough, and it was tough primarily because we couldn't get any lawyers or any consultants to give us the go-ahead from a regulatory perspective. Nobody thought that what we were doing, which was bringing a face-to-face industry online, would fly with the regulator. And that has proved to still be the case in the US. If you want to have a portfolio that's managed for you, then you need to have a relationship, albeit they've relaxed it to say it's a video relationship, but you need to have something face-to-face. So we were looking for a country that can provide us with a regulatory inspiration, if you like, and I really do mean that, someone that was willing to take a chance and try something new to come here, and also somewhere with backers and investors that would want to back an opportunity that is totally new and unproven. And I think, fortunately, on the basis of the fact that it was a big market and no one else was doing it, we had the opportunity to speak to the regulators and to speak to those backers. And I think, about 5 years ago as well, same time as DueDil, I think at that time people were looking around following the financial crisis for a way of rebuilding trust and faith in financial services, and the UK has proved a really good hunting ground for financial technology companies and has taken that position of early innovation and grown it substantially to help companies develop and prosper.
Great, thank you. And then maybe moving on from that, Damien, you mentioned 5 years ago there was really not very much of even a tech scene, let alone a fintech scene in London. What do you anticipate or hope for maybe in these next 5 years?
So I think the UK is uniquely positioned as a country to really be the center of fintech. You know, it straddles the two largest economies in the world by being in GMT. It's, you know, China and the US, and you can service both. But I think that the revolution or the disruption in the UK will be very different to that you see abroad. If you look at, you know, a lot of people are talking about challenger banks in the UK, but the cost of changing from one bank to another is quite high. I think that you know, whereas in Asia, you have, you know, highly unbanked countries with very educated people who are very young, who have huge mobile penetration. In countries like Indonesia, you have 60+% of people under 35 years old. That's where I think the challenger banks will thrive. In Europe, I think it's going to be different, especially in the UK, where there's a lot of chipping away at the profit centers of these banks. And the real disruption in Europe will be in the back office, in the likes of KYC and the likes of other such functions that will be offloaded to new entrants.
Thanks for that.
That was very long.
No, that's all right, but I think it is really relevant because I think we're talking about what's happening both from the market point of view, but also what's going to be happening from retail move to institutional, if I can paraphrase, so thank you for that. Speaking of sort of institutional side, Gonçalo, you mentioned very briefly that you now offer on your platform access to listings. Something, you know, we can all talk about and be very proud all day about the great UK fintech scene and how much value is now being created in the sector. Critics might say or point to the fact that there haven't been as many listings or offerings or sort of, I guess, companies that have come through on the exit side over the last couple of years. I appreciate that you're simply a platform offering access, but what's your view on that, given that you've started to offer some of this?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. One is that the markets have been a little bit shaky recently, but we've been talking since we've announced our new product, our financial product of being able to bring the crowd into IPOs. We've been getting a lot of brokers and a lot of companies getting in touch because effectively what we are offering is an incremental distribution platform. So we're tapping into this demand that it's there in the market that has never really been tapped into. And it's exactly what we did on the crowdfunding side. We're just doing it all over again at a much bigger scale on that side. And the response by companies has been absolutely tremendous because certainly they're not in the hands of 2 or 3 or 4 very large institutional investors. I mean, they will be there and they should be there. That's the whole ethos of SyndicateRoom, is to allow the crowd to invest with professional investors. But what it gives is companies and brokers access to A, an untapped demand, B, a much healthier liquidity because you have small investors buying and selling small amounts that give that healthy liquidity that doesn't move the share price too much. Whereas if you get a large institutional investor suddenly deciding that they need to sell all their shares all in one go, the share price just goes down. So I think that, you know, in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, it is mandatory to have retail investment into every single IPO. I would love to see that happening here in the UK, where suddenly you get a much fairer and transparent access to IPOs. And if that were to happen, it would work in favor of companies, of the whole ecosystem, and it would make it much more efficient, much more cost-effective proposition. And then I think that you'd start getting to see a lot more IPOs, and that in turn would recycle capital into the early stage finance and really starting to support more innovation at an earlier stage.
Fantastic. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
And Wendy, we've talked a lot about mechanics and ingredients for what the ecosystem has brought or has to come. You mentioned, you focus a lot on behavioral analytics. You're working with hedge funds. What do you think FinTech has done in order to bring, I guess, a bit more, Nick mentioned trust, or sort of the emotional side, the non-sort of transactional side of financial services, sort of into the modern age?
Yeah, I mean, transparency is the key word at the moment. And a year ago at the IOSCO conference with 600 regulators around the world, it was clear that the FCA really is setting the scene. And that's one of the huge advantages for London, that we have the financial centre and the technology, but the way the regulators are really engaging now. So with Project Innovate, we're engaging to look at their RegTech sandbox and watching that with interest. And Innovate Finance and all the programs and the government support with Tech City, which we're part of as part of the Upscale program, to enable companies like us that are growing fast to really leverage everything that's out there for us to get at. But really, that transparency word is the buzzword at the moment, which is what we're looking at. And there's huge pressures now on improving standards in the industry, both from the compliance side, but also performance. And how do you make your money? How can you explain to your customers what it is that you're doing so that the trust is brought back into this industry?
And going back to Gonçalo real quick, we were speaking before we came on that you carry around your notebook from this event last year, actually, so you've got a prop. And the page one was from this event, literally last year, and the last page you've just sort of written into are some notes from last week. What do you think are the most, I guess, noteworthy milestones or achievements of the industry and the sector overall in the last year then?
Yeah, it is true. So this is the notebook that I got here at this event last year. And I was I made a presentation on this very same stage. And the notes on the first page, just by coincidence, are the notes that I had for that talk. And on the last page were the notes I had for today. So it's quite interesting to compare how much we and the whole industry has moved in 12 months. But it's really interesting to see that what actually still is the same. And one word that you just mentioned, I have it here, is transparency. So that is still here. That was still here 12 months ago. It's here today. And we as a whole industry should keep that for the very long term. But a lot more has changed as well. The ambition, we always very ambitious and very optimistic as an entrepreneur. So the numbers that I talked about here 12 months ago, we've actually achieved them. That was pretty impressive. And many people never believed in that. And one of the big changes has been the skeptics, where they used to say that will never work, and it's not just for us, for an industry as a whole, that will never work. Then a year ago, they started to say, it might work. And now they're actually coming to us and say, can we invest? And that is a huge change for large financial institutions, going from incredibly skeptical to actually be very interested in the space.
Great, thank you. Nick, what advice would you have? We heard that 60% of the registrants today are entrepreneurs. What advice would you have then for the entrepreneurs that are also establishing fintech companies now?
Oh, I mean, well, first of all, that's a fantastic statistic, and it's amazing to see so many people here. I mean, it's absolutely jam-packed. I think that, fintech goes up and down in terms of reputation. I feel that this year, fintech has got more brand awareness, perhaps a bit, still a bit cooler. But I feel that, we're lacking potentially a bit of substance. And you asked the question about, exits. And so, why is that? Well, I think over the last year or so, maybe a couple of years, we've realized, and everybody has agreed with the fact that the market that we as fintech entrepreneurs are targeting is just giant. But it doesn't need to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not going to get 90% penetration of banking clients switching to your new startup bank overnight. There is just so many people out there touched by financial services throughout everything they do in their life, and therefore, if I was starting again and talking to anyone who wanted to build a business in this sector, I would say don't worry about the cycles of is fintech fundable, is fintech cool, is fintech what's in the groove at the moment. Just remember that all of us are targeting markets which are absolutely gigantic. And unlike any other sector, this really is a long-term game. And it's not it's not going to be the best of times when the funding market dries up and everyone says, oh, fintech's just a sham. Don't get carried away when everyone says that, the big banks are totally scared of you and you're going to eat all their lunch. Just remember to keep a level head, because we're in this industry to drive real change, to help the consumers reach real transparency, and it doesn't need to happen overnight for us all to succeed.
Thank you. Damien, do you have anything you'd add to that?
I think that's really correct. I think, as Nick can probably attest, and I can certainly, nothing's an overnight success, right? Mm-hmm. We think of companies like Slack, for instance, not in the fintech space, that were complete overnight successes, but we don't really realize that, the company that they had been working on before was around for 6 years. Especially if you're starting a new business and you're trying to disrupt a huge market in fintech, it's going to take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And if you don't love that, and if it's not your life, then you should really not do it.
Great. And Wendy, you've been in so many different fields. You've been in the legal industry. You've obviously been in medicine and looked at behavioral insights and how people, in building a business in financial services these last few years, targeting hedge funds. What advice might you have then that comes from a different perspective?
I think I'm amazed at the opportunity that's out there. So I was at Money 2020 last week and they played Jessie J, It's Not About the Money. And it was so not about the money. It was about the innovation. It was extraordinary, the technologies that are coming out. And the opportunity to have that impact globally, really in that kind of 90% of the market that's not been disrupted yet. So Andy Maguire, the COO of HSBC, said they have the world's largest sandbox. And if you can come in and make compliance cheaper and faster and smarter, come and talk to me. So the fact that the banks are opening up, and there are a number of banks out there who are really engaging with fintech, and they understand the legacy technology, it's been there 30, 40 years, actually it needs to work, it needs to be reliable, but they are open to improving it, and they know that fintechs are nimble and they're smart and they're coming up with these phenomenal ideas. So the opportunities are absolutely out there. And so we work with a fabulous professor who's been around for donkey's years. He advised NATO on their decision support systems. And he's got a tagline that says, the gap between theory and practice is bigger in practice than in theory. But actually what we see is, from that conference last week where they're talking about using your face as ID and biometrics and all of that, it's coming really fast now. Yeah. So what was in science for a long time in the academia really is coming out to the people and we can use it. So I think the opportunity is enormous and people are really open to listening to it. If you've got a smart business idea, you're focused, dedicated, passionate about it, definitely the opportunity's there.
Well, I love how optimistic everybody is and yet very pragmatic and realistic and having sort of true lessons learned. Given that I've had a dig about my staying to timeliness, I am definitely not going over, which is probably the only role that I had as moderator with such great panelists. So we're just going to wrap that up, but I encourage you to come speak to these fantastic founders during the day if you can, and hopefully you'll have a good rest of the event. And please join me in thanking then Nick, Damien, Gonçalo, and Wendy.